Hey folks, welcome to this episode of the Fabricators Coach podcast. Back toward the end of last year, we were in a 6-part series on selling your business. We talked with Aaron Crowley, who had sold his business a couple of years ago. We talked with Chase Busenbark, who is a certified business broker, and there was a lot of good information in that. In fact, several weeks ago, I was talking with Rich Katzmann, the executive director of the Rockheads Group, and found out that he really has extensive experience in what's called M&A, the mergers and acquisitions aspect of business. He's also started, grown, ran, and then sold his own brick and mortar business. So the guy's got just tons of experience. And so he was gracious enough to spend some time with us. And for the next 45 minutes or so, there's a lot of neat stuff that Rich has got to share with us. And I really hope you enjoy this episode. Well, hey, Rich, welcome to the Fabricators Coach podcast. Really appreciate you taking some time to talk with us today.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure. It's, you and I were talking a few weeks ago about, the podcast series on selling your business and some of the things that we knew about that. And I've not spent a lot of time talking with you. It was really interesting to find out that, like some people in this, most people in this business kind of grew up in the business, it's been their only career, but you really had a full career before you even got into this industry. Can you kind of give us a high level view of what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. So with the gray hair, right, has come a handful of different opportunities across the board. I don't want to bore people with too much background, but we are going to be talking about kind of acquisitions, preparing your business. And I have a pretty, almost a 30-year career in that. So after business school, I went into management consulting, and pretty much for 5 years, that's all we did was merger and acquisition support. So I got very familiar with what buyers are looking for, what sellers are looking for, and trying to connect the two dots. So spent a lot of time doing that. After I finished that, I started up my own family office, right? It was Dominic's Grocery Stores, right? Kind of a larger Midwest brand. So the Dominic DiMatteo, the son of Dominic's, had a family office, and we'll talk a little bit about that later too, as definitely a potential source of sale, right? Is with these family offices. Started up a venture, electronic textbooks, funded by them, sold that. From there, went into water conservation, started up a company, grew it to about 15 million or so. And then we hired an investment bank to help us sell that business, looked at a bunch of proposals from private equity, decided to sell to a large strategic buyer. So got a little taste of PE, actually completed the transaction with the strategic buyer. So I've always been kind of involved in kind of the merger and acquisition world. Shifted gears completely. I took a couple of years off. After that sale, I had a newborn daughter, wanted to hang out with her before she got to high school and didn't want to hang with me. And then got a call to talk to Laser Products, right? And pretty much everybody on this podcast knows Laser Products.
Right.
Over there, ran that business for about 5 years. Left to start up my own thing again. In the meantime, Laser Products did sell. So again, kind of involved in that transaction a little bit. And then, the Rockheads came calling, and pretty much everything I'd done building up to this fit beautifully with the group, right? So, networking, connecting dots with people, helping people with mergers and acquisitions, all of that kind of fit really nicely in running the Rockheads Group. So I've been here now for a couple of years. And what's been really exciting in the Rockheads is it's exactly what I thought. I'm getting weekly calls from people either saying, hey, I want to sell my business, or, hey, do you know a business that's within 150 miles of this city, right? And so not only are we supporting best practices within the Rockheads, but almost kind of on a personal side too, I'm helping a lot of companies just find each other. And I'm sure you and I are going to talk a little bit more about that upcoming. So sorry, a little wordy on that, but I'm excited again that you asked me to be a part of this, because I love the merger and acquisition side of our business.
Well, your enthusiasm is contagious. That's awesome. That's an impressive background, to be honest. you know, a lot of folks know that I've worked outside this industry and in this industry, and work with small businesses, help them be more competitive and more profitable, and in some cases, getting them ready for sale, doing some turnarounds, but never the depth and breadth of mergers and acquisitions, M&A, you know, that you've been through. Plus, you've got the additional experience of having owned a brick and mortar business,
Yeah.
and grown it and sold it and all that. So I think that really ties into some of the things we want to get into today, because as you and I talked a few weeks ago, we covered a lot of good information in the podcast with Aaron and with Chase, but there's still more to understand. And especially with your background, I think there's some things like, you know, what's the difference between private equity, a strategic buyer, you know, local buyers? How do they impact who you want to work with as a seller? What's the impact on your people? And I think there's a lot of that information that we really didn't cover before that I think you could help folks kind of understand what that looks like. So maybe we can start off talking about some of the different types of buyers, and then maybe move into some of the impact of if you're approached by one or you have a choice, you know, who you want to deal with and why.
Oh, that's great. Sure, sure. So the way I see our industry, we have essentially four different types of transactions or purchasers that would be interested, right? And as you mentioned, let's go from maybe biggest to smallest,
Okay.
right? And we all hear the rumors in the industry. Private equity is very interested in our industry right now.
And why
right?
is that?
Again, just they like brick and mortar, right?
Yeah.
They like the ability to own large customer segments. You know, so if a shop is a Home Depot provider or a Lowe's provider, they like what we do. And there hasn't been a lot of private equity in our space, and there's a big appetite for kind of the new great thing. Just some, you know, some boring facts about private equity right now. There's a concept within private equity called dry powder, right? So essentially a private equity fund, a bunch of very rich people or state funds, school boards, you know, corporations invest and build this large hump of money. And then the goal of the private equity firm is to invest it, build it further, and then sell, right? And so right now, what happens is there's a concept called dry powder, where it's all of this money sitting in the private equity groups that they haven't invested yet. And all of these investors don't want their money just sitting in a fund. They want it out working. So right now, private equity is spending money like crazy, getting out there, buying companies. And we've seen it a lot more on the supply side or the vendor side of our business, right? Companies like Grand Courts, BB Industries, right? They've sold to private equity. Again, a little bit larger, a little bit more national than some of our shops.
Mhm.
So, but private equity's here. I know a couple of private equity groups that are right now actively buying shops across the industry. And there's a couple of factors within private equity that may rule them out from our listeners. So when a private equity company decides to get into countertops, for example, they're going to want to buy what they call an anchor store or an anchor transaction, which is a larger fabricator in the industry. And to be an anchor, generally you need about $5 million of annual profit, right? And so if you work backwards from that and say, okay, maybe I'm earning 10%, right, earnings, right, that says you need to be about a $50 million company or so, maybe a
Right.
$40 million company, maybe you're a very profitable $25 million company, but you've got to be big.
Yeah.
And so that really starts narrowing it down in our industry, right? Because we have a lot of great $3 million companies, $2 million companies, $5 million companies, but we don't have a lot of $50 million companies.
Yeah, we got a whole lot more now than we did 20 years ago, but you're right there. When you start looking at the mix, our average industry size, average company size is still in that $3 million range, give or take, I think. And that's the same data that DuPont had 20 years ago in the DuPont program. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And I believe it. I mean, they're everywhere, right? You hear 10,000 shops, right? Is a number that I hear thrown around quite a bit. So it's a big industry, but it's really fragmented.
Yeah.
So just because you're not a 25 or a $30 million company doesn't mean that you should be ruling out private equity, because once they buy that anchor, Their goal then is to go add on to it and bolt on other companies to it. And so their profit requirements or size requirements for the add-on companies drop considerably, usually around $1 million or so profit. So again, kind of working backwards from there, that now means if you're a $5 million company and you're pretty profitable, you're now in the realm, in the game for private equity, right? So again, it's not for the vast majority of our shops, but if you do qualify, right, it could be a very attractive means to sell your business, right? They have tons of capital, right? They could write you easily a single check and you could be on your way, and life is good sitting on the beach,
Yeah,
right?
go sip those little drinks with those funny little umbrellas on them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there are a lot of $5 to $10 million shops that are making 10 to 20% net that could be in that mix. And it sounds like one of the keys is if your shop is near one of these big anchor shops, then that might put you in the prospective game for that scenario.
Absolutely. We see that all the time. There's a company called KG Stevens out of Milwaukee. Private equity bought them, and then bolted on another shop, in Minnesota, right? So one state over. So you're absolutely right. Location really matters most of the time when they're starting to build a larger presence, with acquisitions.
And part of the thought process behind this, I would imagine, is they're looking at kind of establishing a dominant presence in a geographic area. And then by doing that also, because the shops are relatively close together, they can take advantage of economies of scale, have a GM that runs the whole shooting match, build critical mass for, training new install crews and that kind of stuff. They can do it in one location and feed all the other locations. And, they can, that scale really helps them become very efficient in how they use their money and their critical management talent.
So one of the downsides of private equity is, just as you said, they're looking for economies of scale. They want to get 4 or 5 companies aggregated together, and then they're going to start consolidating, say, your customer service group or your marketing group. Anything that they can centralize and put into one office, they're going to do. So if you do have 20-year employees, or just in general, you love your workforce, selling to private equity probably puts them at the most risk.
Yep.
And so that's just something to seriously consider when starting to go down that path.
And they're doing that because they want those economies of scale. They want to reduce cost, eliminate any kind of duplicate services that aren't, very, very efficient, because what they're trying to do is take the money the investors have given them and generate more returns that you get putting it in a savings account, buying a CD, putting it in a stock market. They're shooting for those 20-30% type returns typically. And if you know how to grow a business well and do that very efficiently and effectively, then they'll make some of the changes you're talking about, and then they can turn around and generate those returns for their investors, which is why they do things the way they do.
Which is why they're in business. Exactly. Well, very well put. And just to take maybe a quick step back and talk about valuations a little bit, right? Let's kind of paint the picture of what maybe a potential owner could expect selling their business. There's a common industry, it's a weird name, called EBITDA, right? Probably about half of us have heard of it. And essentially what EBITDA means is it's the actual profit that your company produces. So the acronym is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So you tend to get rid of all of the kind of weird P&L stuff that an acquiring company won't necessarily have to deal with, right? They've got their own tax base. They don't necessarily they won't necessarily be earning interest or paying interest. So it basically is a really nice measure of, I sell a top for $80 a foot, right? I'm making $8 a foot profit, or however you want to do the math. It kind of gets rid of all the noise. And so what you do then is you look at, take your end of year EBITDA, and let's make it easy and call it $1 million, right? So you're a $5 million company, you've performed really well, you've got a 20% EBITDA, right, which is your $1 million. Okay, what's my business worth? These days, and it fluctuates a little, not a lot, right? On the lower end, you might be at 4 times that number, right? It's called your multiple, right? So $4 million. So you have $1 million in profit. You could go out to the market and kind of on the low end, expect to generate about a $4 million sale. Now, the goal of, and what we're going to talk about a little bit later, Ed, is driving up that multiple, right? So you've got two ways to make money. You increase your profit, or you increase your multiple, right?
Yep.
So as you check things off the buyer's list, as you make them more comfortable, that 4 can turn into a 6, it can turn into a 7, can turn into an 8, right? So so you can essentially double the value of your business without even increasing your profit, just by looking more attractive to someone looking to buy your business.
And that's by making it more sellable, more of a standalone business, less reliant on the owner, better processes, procedures, those types of things. Yeah, when you talk about multiples, it's interesting. I hear a lot of different things from people. I've got a friend who's a CPA who actually ran a countertop shop for a few years. And he tells me that from his experience and his dealings, that multiple runs from 3 to 6. One of the things that Chase Busenbark said in the sessions we talked about was that he's run into some lenders where the lender walks in and said it's going to finance the deal for a buyer, so to for an individual buyer maybe, that's saying our multiple for this industry is 3.2, and
Wow.
that's just it. So that can vary a lot, and the lenders are an impact, and certainly the nature of the business, quality of the business, all the things we've talked about impact that as well. So it's kind of interesting that knowing that is really important, because as you get your business ready to sell, you want to kind of be prepared to drive that thing up and know what that's going to look like.
And a lot of it's about expectations, right? You don't want to
Yep.
go into a negotiation and then be disappointed, right? And maybe get overly emotional, right? This is my baby. Why are you only offering me this? Well, if you know the standard multiple, right, then it becomes a little less personal,
Yep.
and you can negotiate a little differently than feeling insulted.
And I think it's one of the real keys about selling your business in the first place is not making it personal. It is a business. It's a vehicle. And if you really look at your business that way, then you're probably already doing a lot of the right things to increase profitability, increase the multiple, and make this thing easier to transfer to somebody else.
Sure, sure.
Yep.
So I think that wraps up, kind of private equity. Well, I'll tell you, the other downside of private equity is they are beholden to their shareholders to get quarterly results. So the whole feel and nature of your business changes, where you're driven by quarters to show improvement and to show profit. So
Yep.
it certainly changes, not necessarily for the bad, right? But it's certainly a different perspective than the way many of us have run our businesses in the past.
It can be very intense, and I've heard some people describe it as sometimes being brutal. I've
Yeah.
had clients that were owned by small private equity groups that are exactly like what you talk about, and it's all by the numbers. They manage using spreadsheets, and they won't spend a penny unless they can get a dime in return. It's really really very very tight. I actually had a job at one point where I was ops manager for a company owned by American Capital Partners, so very large private equity group, and those monthly reviews were super intense. So yeah, you're whoever's still with the company after the acquisition is going to have a total change in culture, no question about that.
Yeah, yeah, right. And all of that's negative.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I don't know.
Compared to a privately owned, friendly family type environment, yeah, it's totally different. And I would imagine, I haven't been through it, but I would imagine that even the acquisition process, the selling process, is probably pretty intense because they know what they're after. They're really tough to deal with. They're hard negotiators, and it's a different environment than some other transactions.
Sure, sure. So yeah, and again, we're just kind of presenting, right? A lot of nothing wrong with private equity. They have
Yep.
created so many millionaires in our country that started up small businesses. So it's a great way to cash out of your business, right? Because no $10 million company is going public these days, right?
Right.
So it is a great way to liquidate your business, or capitalize and take care of your family. So,
And all we're trying to do is just help folks be prepared. If you get approached by one to sell, you kind of know what you're in for,
you
just be,
got it.
be ready for it.
You got it. Now, the next classification that we're going to chat about is a larger strategic buyer, right?
Okay.
And this is probably where I have the most experience. And even within the Rockheads, there are plenty of shops out there that have multi-state footprints that are looking to grow, right? And so they are constantly maybe targeting a city, and then that's part of their strategic plan. Maybe they do 1 or 2 acquisitions a year, and they go in and say, all right, we're close. Let's reach out another 45 minutes to the next biggest market. And those guys are all everywhere these days, right? And so now the difference there, right, is they know the business, right? And so they're not coming in purely with I need to flip this in 3 years, right? They're going to buy your business and they're going to keep it. You're going to be part of the family, and there can be a lot of advantages to that. I mean, you talk about benefits, right? Being part of a larger company with 401ks and you name it, you could really help your employees out by selling to a strategic, right? More opportunities for growth too. Right now, your employees have maybe a bigger career path or could move to another city that they wanted to go to. So there's a lot of really nice advantages with the strategic buyer. Multiples tend to be about the same, but so you're not selling for less than you would for private equity, but there's few of them out there, right? I mean, if there's a strategic buyer up and say, I'm from Chicago, right, and you're in Florida, they're probably not going to be interested in going all the way down to Florida. So,
Right.
but they're a great opportunity if you can work with one of them.
Any names that you can share that folks may know of or want or need to know of, just in case they get approached, to kind of have an idea who's knocking on the door?
Yeah, well, a Flowform, right? Flowform out of Portland, Seattle, Kent, Washington. They've been very active in acquisitions. Cutting Edge out of Toledo, I think is in 4 or 5 states now,
Okay.
right? So those are a couple that that come to mind right away. I know there's a group in Texas that is aggressively looking to expand out of Texas. So if you're in New Mexico, Oklahoma, Louisiana, I know they're sniffing around quite a bit in those areas too. So yeah, they're all over the country in kind of different degrees, right? So take Denver. I know there's a couple of companies in Denver that are kind of starting slow. So they may only go 1 or 2 towns away, as opposed to I'm going to go hit 5 states. But
Right.
there are a lot of shops out. There's a lot, like, it's kind of the same story as a private equity story. There's a lot of money out there, and that people want to spend, and so that's where some of these strategics can really help and can really be part of your decision process and who to sell to.
And I would imagine that this type of buyer is somebody who's been in the industry for a long time. They know it well. They've run the operations they already have very well, generated a lot of profit, and that's where a lot of that cash comes from. Is okay. We know that now we've kind of unlocked the code. We've built the model. Now let's replicate the model and continue to do more.
Yeah. And again, there's a big advantage. They get your business.
Yeah.
They know how important your install crews are.
Yeah.
It's a much different feel than kind of the private equity purchase.
Yeah, definitely.
And then kind of coming down a notch from there, more of the traditional one that many of our listeners are familiar with. Someone just comes in and wants to buy your business, right? You're ready to sell. They've been sitting on a pile of money. Maybe they want to redefine themselves. We've got a couple of Rockhead members that made bundles of money outside the industry and said, you know what, this looks really interesting. They may have bought a countertop a year ago and and really liked the process. I mean, literally, I think one of the Rockhead members that we have, that was it. He had a crew come into the house and he's like, God, I could really do this. And, and so those guys are definitely out there too. Some of the downsides with that, and there's not many, but a lot of times they ask the current shop to help finance it. So instead of just getting a big check and you go sit on your beach with your umbrella drink, right? You may be required to stay for a few years. They may be paying you a monthly fee, for the acquisition. So, there tends to be a little bit more strings attached, but not always. But that's another great alternative. And there's a lot of those guys out there too. Rockheads have about 120 members total shops. Over half of them are from people outside the industry.
Mhm.
Right. So again, it's very common for, again, we're besides lugging around, pieces of the earth, it's a very attractive industry for someone to get into. And those guys are out there everywhere buying shops too.
And I would definitely second that, because I've had, as you're talking, I'm thinking about clients that I've had the last few years, and I've had a lot more clients that came into this industry from other industries, work with their business for a while, work with their countertop shop for a while, realize they kind of needed a little more input and kind of needed a little bit of help getting up to that next level. And that's where they've called me. And I'm seeing more of that. So that definitely could, matches with what you're saying.
Yeah, and we see it a lot in the Rockheads, right? That's a good reason to join, a best practices organization.
Yep.
Is, hey, I just bought this business. What do I do next? Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we see it quite a bit too.
And I
So
think
again,
one of the advantages of that too is that, a lot of the shop owners, this has been their only career,
Yeah.
and this is all they've known. And when you come at, as you and I both know, because we've come at this industry from other industries, there's a lot of things that happen outside this industry in like manufacturing, for example, which is probably the closest comparison to countertop fabrication. There's a lot of things that are done really well in manufacturing businesses that we're still kind of learning in this industry.
Yeah.
And so I think people coming from outside in can bring a lot of value too. And that can be a real plus when you go to sell a shop, is that there's some things you can learn, and your people who are going to remain behind can learn a lot of things and improve their skills as well.
That's a great point, right? Whether it's technology, we're a little behind in technology, right? We're, ERP systems, for example, we're just getting robots and CNC equipment, and the steel industry and other industries have had that for decades now.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. There are one of the drivers, right, of these people coming from other industries is that they could see this shop, what it was going to look like in 3 to 5 years if they implement what they've done or seen in their other industry.
Yeah. And while I really think I've been really impressed over the last 20 years how quickly we've come up the curve with technology. We've still got some gaps, as you mentioned. The areas I think that are really still big gaps have to do with how we run the business, and there's a whole raft of things there. And that's where, when I was talking, I was kind of thinking about those things, because that professional approach to management, the leadership and things that sometimes when you grow up in the industry, this is all you know, you don't always get that.
Yeah.
So I think that can really improve the environment for the folks who stay behind after a transaction.
Oh, I love it. I absolutely agree with you on that one.
Yep.
Sure. And then we said there were four. The fourth one, I don't have nearly as much familiarity with, which is an ESOP. So essentially, right, you're selling the company to your employees. There's some very complex tax things that happen, and if that's of interest, right? I mean, again, there's lots of people out there that do know ESOPs. I'm just not one of them.
Yeah, my impression, because I've had a little bit of exposure to it, certainly not an expert, is that there are a lot of guidelines. I think there are even some regulations around that. And if you're going to go that way, which can be a great way to go, you really need to get an expert who understands that well, takes care of the pitfalls, and makes sure that after everything's all said and done, your people who end up owning the business are well taken care of and positioned to be successful.
Yeah, yeah. So those are kind of my four different types, of buyers out there. Maybe now, do you want to shift and just kind of talk about the landscape and what you and I are seeing in our industry right now?
Certainly.
I think there's some neat concepts out there that are really driving some of this great activity that we're seeing.
Yeah. What are you seeing?
So there's this concept out there. Maybe some people have heard of it. Maybe some people haven't. It's either called the silver tsunami or the gray tsunami, and essentially it's the baby boomers, right, getting old and finally deciding they want to get out of the business. And so there are a glut. I looked up a quick statistic for our talk today. That 41% of the small businesses out there right now are owned by someone who's 55 to 69 years old. Another 19% are owned by someone who's 70 plus. So that's 60% of the businesses out there are owned by someone who may have had dreams of retiring when they're 55 and are ready to, kind of take that next step. And,
Yep.
there's a magnitude of reasons, generational, handoffs aren't nearly as aren't nearly as prevalent as they used to be. Right.
Agreed.
A lot of the kids out there they see how hard their parents have worked. Right.
Right.
And they don't necessarily want that same level of degree. I read an article recently about millennials are notorious for not wanting to take over their parents' business. Right.
Yeah.
They want to carve their own path. It's, for whatever reasons that, so what's happening is there are all of these businesses out there that are ready to sell.
Yeah.
And then within our specific industry, everybody knows, right, that the COVID years were phenomenal for us, right? People were tired of looking at their dated kitchen, so during the pandemic, our shops on the retail side were just crazy. I mean, 20% the first year of the pandemic increases,
Yep.
20% the second year. So anybody back in 2019 that was considering selling, all of a sudden they're getting these huge increases in business and, are like, well, let's hang on here for a little bit and see where this
Yeah.
can go.
Sure.
But then 23 rolled around, right? And most of our businesses were down 20% or so.
Yeah.
So that is now that kind of COVID wave and now flattening has really shook up and really driven a bunch of our shops where they're just saying it's time, right? It was a great run, it's time. And so from a supply and demand curve, and I'm really glad you mentioned kind of the multiples down in the threes, because that's a lower number than I'm kind of accustomed to in any industry.
Right.
And what I think might be driving that is kind of a supply and demand curve. I think there are so many shops out there that want to sell that, either a strategic or a local guy or even a private equity shop can now kind of pick and choose. And so they're trying to take advantage of the oversupply of people wanting to get out and are using that to drive down value.
So I think the kind of the takeaway from the silver tsunami concept is supply and demand, a lot of shops for sale. I'm seeing more shops for sale. I'm seeing more owners who have an exit strategy. They're thinking about selling than I have in the past, much more now than say 5 or 10 years ago. Kind of parallels that silver tsunami and the aging baby boomers. And then also, when you look on Facebook, and I just track some Facebook groups in the industry just to kind of see what the trends are, what folks are talking about. I'm seeing more and more shops that, hey, I'm thinking about getting out. Anybody want to buy? I've seen guys post, hey, look, I'm done. Here's what I got for sale. Here's the price. Here's where it is, first come, first served. And so I think that parallels some of the supply and demand things we're talking about. So it really means that if you're going to sell your business and you're planning on doing it sometime soon, you need to really get things ready. You got to prepare for that. Aaron Crowley talked about, you need 3 years out there to kind of get ready. But I think you and I were talking, you've got some really key takeaways. I think it's really good for folks to know as they get closer and closer to selling their business.
Yeah, sure. So the nice thing about these, in my view, right, just my opinion, is they do two things. They not only drive up your multiple, right, that we've talked about, but then they also differentiate you with this large supply of shops that are out there. So it's almost, double bang for your buck. And the one thing, so starting off of the list, the one thing that I consistently hear from strategic buyers, especially, is you've got to have procedures. You need SOPs for everything. And that's a consistent theme. I've talked to shops, big shops, that won't even look at buying a shop if you don't have procedures in place, right? And really, this feeds in a little bit to the last one I'm going to talk about, which is being able to show that you can get out of the business, right? If you've got procedures in place, it shows that you've thought through everything. It's replicatable. So if they lose an employee, someone else can come in and do it. But having SOPs is huge. And recently, we've discovered at the Rockheads a software application called Whale, just like the big mammal, spelled exactly the same. And that's exactly what Whale does, is it helps you build your processes. It helps your employees view them, sign off on them when you need to update them. It's just really cool. It's relatively inexpensive, but for anybody thinking, wow, how do I build 50 processes, in my business?
Yep.
Starting with a piece of software like Whale could be a great first step. And so to me, that's number one for a reason. It's the most important.
Okay. And I've heard a little bit about Whale, don't know much about it, but another thing that can be a really big help, because sometimes creating all that, writing all that verbiage and creating all that language is really a challenge. I just wrapped up an interview with Tim Sidoris on using artificial intelligence in this industry, some practical ways to do it. That'll drop sometime in the next few days, which will be some late March, last week or two in March, as we're recording this. But one of the things we talk about is using AI to help at least draft these, and it gives you something to look at. Then you can fine tune it, put it in your own words, and you've got that content that you need. And again, the whole reason that a buyer wants this is they know that the business is scalable. There is if it's ABC Tops, there is an ABC Tops way to template. There's an ABC Tops way to run things through your shop. We have a method for install, and it's consistent. People are trained to it, and you've got those standards. And so that buyer is not buying a job, they're buying a performing business.
Yeah, very well put. Exactly. It just shows that you're professional and you're serious.
Yep.
Right. And so that's why that's at the top of my list. Followed by a close second. And again, this is going to probably sound obvious, but it's got to be said. Your financials have to be clean, right? As soon as you sign an NDA with your dance partner in this, the first thing they're going to ask for is 3 years of financials. And they're going to either have an in-house accountant or hire, an accountant to go through these and look for anomalies and come back with questions. And they're not only judging the numbers, again, it's almost like the procedures. They're judging how serious, responsible, your business is being run because of your financials. And one of the big, it's kind of a joke that we hear, right? That usually means taking your wife off the payroll, right? It usually means, maybe pulling the speedboat out of the balance sheet, right? So there's some cleanup there. In a perfect world, they want 3 years of clean financials. I've certainly seen, 2 do the trick. But so if you're setting your goals looking forward, right? Say you clean your financials today, you're probably 2 years out from maximizing the value of your business by having clean financials.
And it's not just clean financials. I would add 2 more characteristics. Number one, you need a good bottom line, a good healthy bottom line. And if your bottom line doesn't look that great now, you get your financials cleaned up and it still isn't it's a little bit better, but still not great. You need to do the work to get that bottom line much better, and then have 3 years of documented performance is key. And I run across a lot of shops where, the owner is doing his own books. He's got QuickBooks and he's running it and everything's okay. And that's sufficient for him running the business. But I think it also helps your multiple and helps the valid to help validate your finances when you've got maybe an outside CPA who's running your books, doing, looking at them, running the monthly P&Ls, advising you, doing your taxes. That means you've got a disinterested third party who's looking at that saying, yeah, this is pretty clean. This was right. You've got good business practices here, because I think that helps just make it, again, more serious, more professional, and increases that perception of value.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And just since you mentioned increasing profit too, let's plug our coverings, right? You and I are going to be doing a couple of educational sessions at coverings, so
Certainly.
definitely come by. But one of the sessions is benchmarking, and one thing we found in the industry is unfortunately our industry's profit, right, net profit is on the low scale of most small businesses. Right, our shops are generally, right, an average shop is generally making 5%, 6% profit, where other small businesses out there are making usually in the double digits.
Yep.
Right. So a good way, Ed, for as you say, not only clean, but kind of analyze, right? If you're down in the 4, 5, 6%, there are lots of companies that are making 10, 15 in our industry. So there is an opportunity for you to increase your profitability. That you're absolutely right. That's kind of the other side of the financials that we should all think about.
I think 10 is kind of a typical target in this industry, something that folks who are not making 10 want to get to. But I run into a lot of shops, they're doing 15, 20%. So it's definitely doable, and it's not a Herculean effort. So if you're down in those, low to mid single digits, there's upside and there are ways to get there. Get involved in industry associations, go meet other shops, go tour other shops, come to coverings, go to TICE, go to these sessions and find out how to do some of that.
Yeah, yeah. And going off on a quick tangent also, and then we'll get back to the core. My other favorite multiple out there, and it was really originated by Peter DeCock, the original founder of Grand Courts. And he used to walk into shops, and this is decades ago, and it still holds, which is amazing. How much revenue are you making per employee? That can really give you an indication of if you're staffed correctly. And the magic number for years is $200,000. So add up your employees and multiply it by $200,000 and see where you fit. Within the Rockheads, we do a kind of an extensive benchmarking analysis. And
one of the best.
We got done with last year's, and our average was 202,000. So we were, the number still works. So that should be everybody's goal, is to be at least in that ballpark.
And I think that's an awesome stat to have. I think another thing to be aware of is as a business owner, if you've never done any concerted effort to improve your business, if you've not gone in and looked at how you do what you do and all the things that you hear about from all these industry groups and all the articles and publications and all, if you haven't done any of that kind of stuff and you're running around, those low to middle single digits. Another good stat that has held true for decades, if you walk into a manufacturing plant that's never had any improvement efforts done at all, you're typically, once you get through a pretty concerted effort, you can free up anywhere from 10 to 30% of the capacity you're paying for. That means you can get 10 to 30% more work through your shop without having to buy new machinery or hire a lot of people. That's the kind of upside that's available if you sit down and work on your business and do some of the stuff we're talking about. Obviously, that drives EBITDA up. And then when you've cleaned things up like that, the perception of value, your multiples, all those things improve. So yet another reason to stop and think about how you do what you do and work on your business.
Yeah, that's a huge number, 10 to 30. I believe it, right? I mean, we've been in shops. I absolutely believe it. And that is a huge number.
Well, back 30, 40 years ago, very early in my career, I'm telling my age now. There were industrial engineering contracting firms that would put IEs in your shop and go through and do work measurement, time studies, develop production standards, stuff like that. They would guarantee 30% back then, because if you had never done anything in a manufacturing plant, they knew they could find 30%. And as a classically trained IE, having done some of that work, I think the number's right. And then when I go into work, even in small shops, and we start fine-tuning processes, cleaning things up, frequently we hit very close to that number. Been lots of times we've been higher than that number.
Yeah, that's really cool. I don't want to call it free money, but it kind of is, right? I mean, it's there for you to do.
Because once the improvement's been done and you've paid for whatever it took to make the improvement, you get the benefit forever.
Yeah, that's really cool. So back to our four, right? So we talked about procedures, cleaning up the financials. Next is certainly a timely thing that's really gaining momentum now, and it's OSHA, silicosis, right? Risk mitigation. So we strongly recommend doing the voluntary OSHA program, right? Reach out to OSHA, sign up for that. It buys you 18 months where they can't do a surprise visit, because I tell you, OSHA is out there in waves right now. Our members are getting hit, 2, 3 a week now out of our 120. And they're looking for money, and they're looking, they've got to fund their trip, right? So first thing they do is they walk over to the forklifts. There's 20 grand for some reason. So we've got to be ready for OSHA. And then the silicosis side of things, right? It's not going away. What California's doing is very quickly rolling out to the rest of the country, right? Usually California leads with their wackiness, and then it takes 7, 8 years, 10 years, like lead faucet type of things. to finally get to the rest of the country. With silicosis, man, it is rolling. I'm already hearing Colorado, certainly Washington and Oregon are right there. So this is going to be not a California problem. This is going to be a U.S. problem here pretty quickly.
I would
And
agree.
and so right, and so anyone picture yourself buying a company. You don't want to buy a company that has a potential lawsuit of, unfortunately, an employee with silicosis,
Yep.
right? So you should get ahead of the curve, get everybody tested, right? A best practice is to test all new employees coming in, right? To get that baseline before they even start at your shop.
Yeah, think about even if you hire as an existing owner, you hire an employee from another shop or who's working 3 or 4 shops, and let's say they did that for 15 years, they got a lot of good experience, good talent, but all those shops were cutting dry.
Yeah.
What's the liability that you're buying when you hire that employee? So do the baseline testing when you hire them, and then obviously, if you're looking at buying a shop, do the baseline testing so you don't have that future liability. And if you're going to sell a shop, make sure you've done all the things to minimize that as much as you can for all the right reasons, plus for the value of your shop.
Yeah, yeah. Our strategics that I talk to won't even look at a dry shop these days, and that's new. They, 3-4 years ago they may have.
Yeah,
but it's just off the table.
And what does Rockheads have any resources for ways to do that well? Training materials, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So we run multiple webinars on the topics. Again, being a networking organization and with so many shops being hit, we've been able to kind of get them on a phone call and everyone just kind of have a conversation of what to expect. We do partner with NSI. I love the resources that they've put together. They've got checklists. They've got most common, fines that go out. So I would certainly recommend people going to NSI. And then also at NSI, they have a 4-hour online course where you can get silicosis certified.
Yep.
And we strongly recommend going through that, laminate the sheets, put them everywhere so that when OSA shows up, they're seeing that you're serious about taking care of your employees.
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit earlier about this industry kind of coming up with a curve on some things. And I was talking about some of the management practices. I think safety falls right squarely in that. And I don't want to get into it now, but I think silicosis is the beginning of a lot of other safety challenges in this industry. Again, I don't want to get off on that tangent right now, but certainly things that you do along those lines show that you're serious about your business, you're a professional, makes it a more attractive acquisition target for somebody who wants to buy you.
Yeah. And those tests aren't that expensive, right?
Yeah.
So it's just worthwhile to do.
Yeah, and it's not hard to make that shift if you're still doing some dry processes. It's really not that difficult.
True, very true.
Yeah.
And then my number 4 on my list, right? I mentioned earlier is really to show that the business can operate without you, right? Because someone buying your business, right? I mean, the reason you're selling is probably you want to go sit on a beach, right? So the person buying the business isn't going to have you there, with your business contacts and your expertise. So make sure that you've got direct reports, you've got employees in the company that know what you know, right? And in addition to having all the procedures down, but you definitely have to be able to show that the business will go on without you.
They don't just need to know what you know, they need to have the authority to make those decisions. And a great test, we talked about this a little bit earlier, I think, was take a week, go sit on that beach and sip those funny little drinks with umbrellas in them. And if you're still getting a lot of phone calls and emails and have to make decisions, if the people just are informing you of things just to, so you're aware, that's one thing. But if they're calling you, say, hey, I need a decision on X, right, that's an indication you haven't quite gotten yourself. And the analogy I use is a large tent with a central pole that holds the tent up. If, as the owner, you're the long pole in the tent, they pull you out, the tent collapses, your business isn't ready to sell, and your multiple is going to be a lot lower.
Yeah, no, great. I love that analogy. I can picture that. So that's that's kind of where my head's at. That's what I hear again from our strategics, from private equity groups that I'm talking to smaller shops that just want to buy other shops. It really is those 4 things are driving everything these days.
I would agree 100%. I've worked with some owners getting shops in this industry and others ready to sell, helping them get ready for their exit strategy. All this certainly rings very true. And folks, as you're listening, as you start thinking about your exit strategy, or what do you want to do when you're not doing this anymore, not doing this business anymore? At some point, you got to cash out. What's that look like? Rich is, just a huge wealth of information. I think you've gotten you got more than your money's worth in this podcast for sure. Tongue in cheek. To get more information like that, how can folks get in touch with you, Rich, if they've got questions or want to know more about the Rockheads Group?
Yeah, well, you can probably tell by my excitement level that I absolutely love this topic. My cell phone, right? If anybody wants to get a hold of me, either to have a conversation about the Rockheads, which would be great, or just talk about your specific circumstance, more follow-up questions, just ring me on my cell phone, 815-210-1006, or send me a quick, text message, email. It's richk@rockheadsusa.com.
Okay.
And either one I'll respond to immediately, because again, I love this stuff.
Super. That's obvious to tell by your enthusiasm. And also too, Rich and I will be doing some discussions on the Fabricator stage at Coverings in the middle of April. So if you want to stop by and talk to either or both of us, meet Rich in person, shake his hand and ask him some questions, and the same with me as well. And again, I still run into so many shop owners who just don't talk to other shops that much and don't get into other shops and don't go to industry events. Really want to encourage you, if you're one of those shop owners, come to Coverings. It's in Atlanta this time. So if Florida's been too far for you, Atlanta may be a little closer. If that's not an option for you because of timing and other things, join some of the industry groups, talk to Rich about Rockheads. There's some fairly decent groups on Facebook that you won't get as much out of those because, it's a typical internet dynamic, but you've got some other industry groups that sometimes have their own Facebook group that you can get some good discussion on. So reach out, look for some opportunities, get involved in the industry, expand your horizons. It'll do nothing but help make your business better. And as you start looking at exit strategy, you can put a little more cash in your pocket so you can have a few more of those umbrella drinks on the beach. Rich, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. Hopefully this has been I think it'll be very beneficial for our listeners. And I've enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun.
Same here, Ed. I always enjoy working with you. And I really look forward to Coverings too. I think that's going to be a lot of fun also.
It'll be a blast, man. Looking forward to it.
All righty. Take care.
Thanks a lot. I told you up front to learn some new things about selling your business, and I think Rich really delivered for us. The guy's obviously just a wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate his time and talking with us. And if you want to know more about this, Rich gave you some contact information during the episode, but we'll also be on the Fabricator stage talking together about some other topics at Coverings in April in Atlanta. So we'll look forward to seeing you there. Happy fabricating.